Hello everyone, this is an analysis of Game 2 of the Ouza title match that's going on right now between Fujii Sota, the reigning Ouza, and Nagase Takuya, the challenger. So Fujii won Game 1 in a bishop exchange, and Game 2 was the same, more bishop exchange. And this was pretty much a book line through to maybe move like 50 or 60 or something like that. And I think there's a lot to learn if you're interested in mainline bishop exchange theory. So here is a key point to begin with, and this is probably the most popular bishop exchange line, which is reclining silver, which is getting the silver out to here. There's other ones that go where the silver comes this way. We can do a bishop exchange bogeying. That's not very popular in pro matches. And the other possibility is what Nagase is showing here potential for, which is to bring the silver up this way, and that is called hayaku digging. So it's a bit more of an aggressive opening, whereas the reclining silver is a bit more of a, not necessarily defensive opening, but more balanced opening. So yeah, the specific move order from Nagase is showing, hey, like, I might go Hayaku still. He's like more flexible, whereas Fujii's like, no, I'm just going for reclining silver directly. So they go ahead and include these edge pawns, and again, this is just a very, very classic opening. And now once Nagase's gone ahead and jumped this knight up, he's saying, okay, we're going to play a double reclining silver game. And so these moves are pretty much kind of just like book moves. They're just getting to their shapes. And I guess one key point is that this structure of golds and rooks are going to get mirrored by both players here. And this is kind of the modern day bishop exchange. It used to be that you moved your silver to the middle of the board and kept your rook here, but it's been figured out with AI that this structure is very, very good at covering every single square in your camp. And so bishop drops aren't really available. So this is considered to be a very, very good structure in order to defend against bishop drops. And you can see both players have gone for mirrored structures. And you can say that this exact position right here is like the main researched position in bishop exchanges right now. And pretty much any branching that people do is usually going to come after this. Now, if Nagase makes this move, pawn 4-4, for example, it's a completely mirrored structure. In this position, I believe if two engines play this, Sente is favored like 90% or something like that. Even though the engine evaluation is so even, this position is just very, very good for Sente based on the joseki and the very, very deep lines that people have researched. So the joseki line here for Gote is actually a pretty funny one, which is to move the king back to 5-2. And the idea here is that Gote is willing to play for a repetition draw and just wants to move the king back and forth. And it used to be that the king would, say, retreat here and try and castle over here. But then there's this odd moment where Gote can repeat, and if Sente goes ahead and castles the king, now the king is actually in a bit of danger, and Gote can actually start an attack. And it's basically kind of been proven out that this is good for Gote. So instead, Sente makes another very strange looking move, which is king to 6-9. Right? Like, he's essentially going to take two moves to do something he could do in one move. But it turns out that the best move for Gote, again, is to shuffle. But now, because you took two moves, here, if Gote tries to shuffle the king back, now when the king enters, if Gote tries to start an attack, the king being here instead of here makes a big difference. It's closer to counterattacks, essentially. And this is actually proven out to be good for Sente. So you see these like very odd looking king moves here, but there's a reason for them, right? And this is why, bishop exchange is probably the hardest joseki to learn, because it is so deeply researched that these really funky looking king moves are actually very important. So me personally, I avoid this. I don't play into this because some people are very very booked up in this opening. But I thought, since they played it in the title match and they played such a book line, it's a decent opportunity to kind of introduce it to everyone and try and explain some of the strange moves that you see in these Bishop Exchange openings. Okay, so in order to avoid that line, what Gote does is start, instead of shuffling the king back and forth, you can actually shuffle the silver back and forth. So that's kind of the start of what Nagase is doing here. And then Fujii goes ahead and enters his castle with his king. Again, Nagase is shuffling. And the cutting edge move is to just go ahead and jump the knight immediately for an attack. Now, this is a very risky move. Because Nagase can simply run away, and now he's threatening to push the pawn, and he's going to be able to capture the knight. So essentially, the theme of these bishop exchanges is, can Sente get away with jumping the knight very quickly, and can Gote punish it, and can they capture the knight for free? So obviously, Fujii knows this, so he needs to start some sort of an attack. And it's very common in bishop exchanges to do something like this, where you literally just throw all your pawns at your opponent, sack all of them, and that way, if you can get some pawns in hand yourself, you'll have a counterattack, and you can kind of manipulate your opponent's pieces around the squares you want them in, and we'll see this come into play later in the game. So here, Fujii goes ahead and finally actually captures one of the pawns, and this is like, the first trap or trick that's available to Sente in this opening. So if you do something that feels very natural, for example, like dropping a pawn to defend, you can see the evaluation spike, and immediately there's knight sack on 5-3 with a promotion. So here, if you take with the gold, you can actually then sack the rook. Gold takes, and then you have this fork. You might think, oh, I can defend the gold, but then just silver drop, and all of these squares are covered. So this would be good for Sente. Basically, it's the same idea. If you capture with the king, you have this, and instead of dropping on this side, now this time you have this drop. So actually, in this position, you can't defend the second file. And I mean, you don't really need to, because the gold is already protecting the silver. And so actually the key idea that you need to stop in this position is rook taking 5-4, right? This combination of moves is what you need to stop. And so Nagase goes ahead and pushes the pawn to 4-4. This is essentially the main line. And it looks really funky because you can just take it for free. But the idea here is you force the rook to take the pawn, then you get to come up with the gold, and now the gold is defending both of these squares. So you've prevented that knight sack on 5-3. Fujii has to go back. Now you can go ahead and defend the second file, and Fujii goes ahead and retreats his rook. So here, basically, Sente has succeeded in damaging his opponent's structure, and Gote is essentially still threatening to drop a pawn on 4-4 and capture the knight for free. And that's what Nagase goes for. And obviously Fujii can't just allow this pawn capture, so he goes ahead and tries to counterattack on the 7th file, right? And so if you take the knight here, then Fujii's going to be able to take this pawn and get this knight back. So Nagase needs to prevent that, and he defends the knight's head with the silver. Fujii goes ahead and takes, and he drops a pawn back. So here, if you take, there's a couple moves. So the obvious one, I think, is to just drop a pawn on 7-4, and then you're going to be able to get your knight back. But actually, the best move is this. And now your opponent's attack is quite weak. The silver is in the middle of nowhere, no longer attached to the rest of the board. And you can start attacking, maybe with like something like this. Not exactly sure how this line goes. But the idea is here you have compensation for the knight because the silver is in the middle of nowhere. And it blocks the rook, and like the whole attack gets blocked, and so giving up the knight is okay. Yeah, so here the joseki move is to not take it, is simply to retreat, because now I can't push the pawn and attack the knight. Silver's guarding it. So here you see some tactics from Fuji, and here is the value of all of those pawn sacks from before, right? So before, pawn was here and here, and here and here. So what the pawn sacks allow is this pawn drop on 1-3, an edge attack. So you can't take with the silver because then the rook will promote. And if you take with the knight, obviously, then just pawn drop on 1-4, and you're going to get the knight back. And if you just ignore it, then lance is going to take and pawn's going to promote. So here you have to take with the lance. But now you can actually drop a pawn on 1-4. That's what Fuji does. And after the lance captures, this is Fuji's idea for how to get compensation and not just give the knight away for free, is this bishop is now targeting the lance on 1-4. So you can guard it with the silver. It's the only way to guard it, but then again, rook promotion. So here, Nagase kind of waves the white flag and says, okay, fine. I'm just going to capture, and we're going to trade these pieces. And Nagase goes ahead and defends 2-3 with the gold. So otherwise, the bishop can sack, and the rook's getting in. So here, Fuji, again, this is all joseki line. Like, this has all been played before. In fact, this position has been reached something like 6 or 7 times in pro games, including multiple times this year. So you can see most of the times actually that this position has been reached has been this year, because it's really the cutting edge theory and everybody is kind of researching it and trying to find some new moves. But in this position, most of the games have gone pawn 8-6. And after pawn takes, a connecting pawn, or tsugifu is what it's called. And this is a very common tactic a lot of times to try and get the knight involved. In this case, it's a little bit different, but this is how most games have gone in this position. But here's the first deviation from previous joseki lines that Nagase throws in, which is pawn to 9-5. So you can see it's not the best move, but sometimes in these games you need, especially as gote, you need to find somewhere to kind of throw your opponent off and try and find an opportunity where your opponent might not be as well prepared. So that was the idea here. Now, if Sente takes the pawn, this ends up being pretty good for gote. For example, this is the main idea, and then a knight drop. So it's a very similar idea to what happened the other side of the board, where you're bringing the lance up the board in order to capture it. And this becomes very difficult to defend, and is actually good for gote if this happens. So Fujii actually thought for a while here, so he wasn't like prepared, but he understood that taking the pawn was bad. And so he plays this move, pawn to 4-4. And it looks kind of like a strange move, almost maybe a nothing move, but actually it's a big threat, right? So if the pawn promotes, for example, you can't take it with the gold, because there's a weakness here. And same thing, you can't take this with the gold right away, because this threat of bishop sacking itself on 2-3 and the rook getting in is so large. So what Nagase decides to do here is counterattack with the pawn drop on 7-6. And you see in the engine evaluation here that actually the best move is to just retreat the silver. And this is pretty much what all of the commentators were expecting. I would presume this is what Nagase was expecting, not just in terms of, you know, reading the position in the game, but also in his AI prep, right? Like he prepped this line with AI. But Fujii throws his curveball here, and he goes ahead and takes the pawn. Now, taking the pawn might seem like a very natural thing to do, but you just saw this knight drop in order to take the lance, but this actually runs straight into the knight drop immediately. And even here, actually, I think the natural move is to run the silver. Actually, wait, yeah, I think I was a little okay. Yeah, so you take the pawn and then the knight drop. Okay, this is where Fujii throws his curveball, because here you should just retreat the silver. Normal people should just retreat the silver, but not Fujii. He actually goes ahead here and drops a lance on 4-6. So obviously he's essentially building up power to attack on 4-3 and kind of force this in. But it's kind of a crazy move, because you're just sacking the silver. Not only are you sacking a silver, you're letting your opponent take it with check. So So again, it's not like completely engine approved, but what the commentators were speculating here is that he did it to throw Nagase off because once you get this position, getting to here kind of plays itself once Nagase plays this pawn to 9-5 move, and obviously Fujii knows that pawn to 9-5 is not one of the top engine suggestions, and so Nagase must have prepped it, and when he gets to this position, he probably also understands that the prep move is probably silver back, pawn takes, and then okay, what do you do from there? But he decided to counterattack instead because he figured Nagase wouldn't have studied this because it's such a illogical move to not retreat the silver. So we're out of book here now, finally, but hopefully you got a bit out of that initial joseki explanation of some of those opening moves. But now these players are on their own. They started to take a lot of time, both of them. So after the king runs, Nagase goes ahead and pushes his pawn. Pawn takes, and then pawn drop on 4-5. Now it turns out that something like pawn drop on 8-8 might have been a better try for Nagase. But this is kind of not Nagase's style. He's not the I'm going to counterattack you guy. He's the guy that just defends. And so pawn 4-5 is a defensive move, right? If you take with the silver, it blocks your lance. And when Fujii takes with the lance, now Nagase can go ahead and defend 4-3 with the silver with tempo on the lance. Really, really trying to defend against the threat. The problem with this silver move, though, is that it vacates the defense of the 7-4 square. So now Fujii can go ahead and attack the knight's head. And there's really no way to deal with it. And so Nagase is kind of now forced to counterattack, and he goes ahead and drops the silver. That's a scary, scary move, coming in this way, potentially this way. But you got to give Fujii some credit. Like, he decided this is okay, right? So he goes ahead and takes the knight. Nagase recaptures the gold with the gold. And now Fujii goes ahead and sacks the pawn on 4-3. Here, silver recaptures. That was the whole point of bringing the silver up, is to defend against this. And then gold takes on 4-3. Now, in this position, Fujii plays knight drop on 5-5. Now, initially when I saw this, I thought, whoa, actually, didn't you just get what you wanted? Why not just, go with the initial plan to sack the bishop? The problem with sacking the bishop now is, yes, you get your rook in, but because your king has gone to 7-7 in order to avoid that knight, now there's this bishop drop, forking the king and the gold, and this would have been completely winning for Nagase. So actually the sack doesn't work anymore. But instead, okay, you still have a good move. Knight drop, hits the gold, potentially blocks an escape square for the king. So Nagase goes ahead and runs the gold. But now pawn drop on 7-4. If you take, this square is open, so you don't want to do that. And so Nagase goes ahead and retreats to 7-2. And now pawn drop on 4-5. Normally I would say when you don't know what to do, Tataki no Hu, but usually Fujii is going to know what he's doing when he does pretty much all of his moves. Yeah, but at this point, can't retreat. If you run either of these ways, 4-3 is completely open. So Nagase decides, okay, all I can really do is take the knight. Let's try and diffuse some of the threat. Yeah, Fujii's king looks like it's in danger, but it's actually right now pretty safe. It's got a lot of room to run this way. So Nagase decides this is to drop this lance. This is a defensive move to prevent any shenanigans here and to kind of force potentially to block the pawn. It also defends the move that it's trying also to defend is actually bishop back to 2-5, and this actually ends up becoming a very key idea in this position in order to activate this bishop, because okay, we took the lance on the edge, but other than that, this bishop's kind of just staring at a pawn, right? It wanted to sack itself, but now we can't because of this pawn drop. And so the only other way that it had to get back in the game is this. And it's actually a pretty big threat. And so that's kind of what this lance drop is doing, is trying to prevent this move from the bishop. Fuji just ignores it, and obviously also it's threatening to take the rook, right? So there's this primary threat of taking the rook, but the main thing that it ends up doing is preventing this. And obviously Fuji just ignores it. Yeah, he says take my rook. So obviously here you can't take the rook because it's mate in 3, right? Anywhere the king goes, there's a gold drop. So you can't take the rook yet, and so Nagase goes ahead and runs a king. Fuji ignores the lance again with this silver drop. Again, can't take the rook because of this bishop move now, right? The lance has moved, and so now the bishop can get itself in the game, and this is actually a mate. So yeah, can't take it. Can't take the rook. Don't really want to take the silver. So here Nagase goes for a counterattack. King runs, and then bishop drop on 3-4. So this is actually a pretty nice move, I think, from Nagase. It's check, and it's helping to protect this 2-5 square. So basically prepping potentially to take the rook without giving up that bishop 2-5 move. And Fujii says, I kind of don't care. It's okay. So now, if you take, the problem is this isn't a tsumero. There's actually not a mate threat to take the rook, and so Fujii can actually just take the gold, and this is a tsumero, right? So if you say like take this gold, now there's a very, very easy mate starting with a gold drop on 4-3. So it's just like a crazy game where, you know, it got to the end and Fujii just didn't defend any of his pieces, and he's just consistently making threats against the opponent that they have to deal with. So they just don't have time to take these pieces. So instead, what Nagase does is pawn drop on 4-7. So obviously the idea is that this is a tsumero. But apparently not. Yeah, this one is a head scratcher. I tried to analyze it a little bit, but I'm not actually sure exactly what Nagase was thinking, other than, hey, like maybe I can take the gold. But basically in this position, Fuji ignores it again and goes ahead and just takes the gold. So obviously this is a tsumero from Fuji's side. So Nagase goes ahead and takes the gold with check, but Fuji just takes it. So I mean, I think probably all the way back when Fujii decided to let his silver hang and give up the, knight takes the silver with check, he probably had something like this in mind all the way back in that move, where, he kind of just read through my king's safe, and it's actually very, very difficult for my opponent to even make threats. And so that's probably why he went for it, which is kind of crazy. So Nagase here tries to do something with the pawn, but actually not good enough because the bishop can take. And then he goes ahead and makes this pawn drop, obviously just threatening to take, and you can't actually run anywhere without allowing a big attack. But again, turns out the threat is just not big enough, and Fujii can simply counter. So he goes ahead and drops this gold. You have to take it. Pawn recapture with the king, and this is Fujii's idea, and we've seen it the whole time. All he wanted to do was get this bishop on 2-5, and he does it with a bishop drop. So again, a super unintuitive move. You're dropping it right in front of a lance, but if lance takes, now you get the other bishop to take on 2-5, and this was the whole attacking idea that he had the whole time. So here, the best the king can really do is run like the 4-2. In this position, you have something like, lance drop in here or something, and this is just ends up being a mate. And actually, Nagase just resigned after bishop drop on 2-5. So this was, I think a very instructive game if you're trying to learn bishop exchange for declining silver at the very, very beginning. Nagase tried to throw Fujii out of his prep with this pawn to 9-5 move. It worked in a sense, but Fujii just did Fujii things here and just kind of proved why he's the best bishop exchange player in the world. I believe, I think there was a position earlier where I said that engines here are 90% with Sente. And actually, Fujii is even better than that. Now, obviously, he's not playing against engines, he's playing against other human players. But I think in that position as Sente, Fujii is something like 12 wins, 1 loss. So it was really a bold move for Nagase to challenge Fujii in that position. You could say it was a stupid move instead, and he's poking the bear when he doesn't really need to go for this. But yeah, like he went for it. He challenged him in his best line, and I guess in a way paid for it a little bit because Fujii really showed his class here. So yeah, again, super complicated joseki in the opening, and then I think Fujii really carried it through and just showed his strength in these positions. So thanks for watching. I'm not exactly sure when Game 3 is, but obviously when it happens, I'll be covering it. And my next video should be another WOSC video, so look forward to that. Thanks for watching.